And there was no way to go and buy another mirror, but they gave up that mirror for the church.
One mirror.
One mirror, Alex. See, the only way you can see yourself is in a mirror. And the women made a great sacrifice for the church. You see, women need mirrors for their glory. The Bible says a woman's glory is her hair. But when they gave up their mirrors, they gave up their glory. The time that they would spend looking in the mirror, now they spend that time looking at the church. And they gave up their mirrors for a great purpose. The mirrors were used to make a laver. Moses took instruments of vanity and made them into vessels for cleansing. We take our mirrors for granted, but they only had one mirror, and they gave up their mirrors. One, Alex. And they gave up their mirror for the church. Now, the laver was one of the most important vessels in the church. You see, the laver was a large bowl on a stand. And there was a bowl on the top and a bowl on the bottom. And the bowls were filled with water that came from the rock that Moses had smitten. And the laver stood between the altar and the court. And the only way the priest could get to the altar was to go by the laver. But God said in chapter 30 and verse 20 that if the priest come to the altar and wash not, they will die. And that was so important that God repeated it again in the next verse, that if the priest come to the altar and the priest don't wash their hands and the priest don't wash their feet, God said that the priests were going to die. You see, with our hands, we do unclean things. With our feet, we go to unclean places. We sin with our hands and with our feet. And God is so holy that the priest couldn't come into God's presence without washing. And God said, if they come in my presence and they don't wash, God said they're going to die. And so the priest had to have a way of cleansing themselves. And the only way the priest could cleanse themselves was if they had some water. And the only way they could know if they were clean was if they had a mirror. Now, God didn't ask the women. Moses didn't command the women. The women just saw a need in the church. And they made a voluntary sacrifice to give up their mirrors for the church. I need you to see what's going on here. You see, the altar represents the presence of God. And the laver stood between the court and the altar. In other words, the laver was between the priest and God. And in order for the priest to come into God's presence, they had to clean themselves. And so the laver contained water that came from the rock that Moses had smitten. Well, you do know that Christ is a solid rock. And water was used for the cleansing. And you do know that Christ is the living water. And the mirror allowed them to see themselves. To see if they look like they ought to look. It allowed them to see where they fall short. It allowed them to see where they were wrong. And see, the laver is the mirror, and our our labor is a little book called the Bible. We look in that labor to see if we're clean. We need to spend more time in the Word. Because Jesus said, you are clean through the word that I have spoken. We need to wash some dirty words out of our mouth. We need to wash the gossip that we hear out of our ears. We need to wash those dirty things we see on the TV out of our eyes. We need to look in the label every day and look in that Bible and see, are we clean or unclean? We need to look and see, am I wearing too much pride today? We need to see, have I got on the right attitude today? We need to look in the Word and see, is my tongue tightened up today? Look at the label and see, is my temper too short? Is my wearing enough patience today? Have I got enough compassion on today? We need to look in the label and see, do we look like Jesus wants us to look? You see, the women made a great sacrifice for the church when they gave up their only mirror. But women have always made a great sacrifice when it comes to God's church. Moses' mother made a great sacrifice when she put him in the river to save him from Pharaoh. Hannah made a great sacrifice when she brought Eli to the temple when he was just a little boy. Ruth made a great sacrifice when she left her homeland to follow Naomi. Esther made a great sacrifice when she put her life on the line and went before the king. Deborah, y'all do know about Deborah. She made a great sacrifice when she led the army against Sisera, 600 chariots. The widow woman made a great sacrifice when she didn't have but just a little bit of meal. But Elijah said, feed me first. Anna made a great sacrifice when she prayed in the temple from her virginity till she was 80 years old. Mary made a great sacrifice when she told the angel, be it unto me as thou wilt. The women are always making a great sacrifice.